He used to make grown men weep just by walking into a room. Now he sat alone in the dark, a broken man in a wheelchair, staring at the gun on his desk. The empire was gone. The woman he loved had walked out without a single word, and the men who once swore loyalty to him vanished, like smoke. Jasper Kane had survived bullets, betrayal, and blood, but no one warned him that the thing that would finally save him would be a 4-year-old girl named Rosie. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now sit back, because part 1 starts right now. The night Jasper Kane lost everything. It didn't thunder, it didn't rain. The sky was perfectly clear, almost insulting in its calm, and the only sound in the world was the hollow click of a wheelchair wheel hitting the edge of a Persian rug worth more than most people's houses. He stopped moving. He always stopped at that rug. It marked the boundary, the invisible line between the east wing of the mansion and the corridor that led to the master suite, the room he used to share with Monica, the room he hadn't entered in 63 days. He knew because he'd been counting. "Mr. Kane," the voice came from behind him, soft but measured. "Your dinner is getting cold." He didn't turn around. "Leave it." A pause. "Sir, you haven't eaten since—" "I said leave it, Elise." Another pause. Longer this time. He could hear her breathing. She was deciding whether to push back. She always did that, waited in that quiet, careful way of hers. Most people, when they worked for Jasper Kane, learned quickly that silence was the safest answer. But Elise wasn't most people. "You haven't eaten in almost 2 days," she said, her voice steady, no tremor in it. "I'm not leaving until you eat something, even if it's just the bread." Jasper finally turned the wheelchair around. She was standing in the doorway, a woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled back, still wearing her uniform from the day's work. There was no fear in her eyes, just that quiet, maddening steadiness that had kept him from firing her 3 separate times in the past month. He stared at her. She stared back. "Fine," he said finally, his voice rough. "Leave the bread." She set the small basket on the side table without another word and turned to go. "Elise." She stopped. "Your daughter." He said it like it cost him something. "She's been in the East Wing again. I've heard her." There was a flicker of something across Elise's face, guilt or maybe worry. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kane. She won't go in there again. I'll speak to her." "That's not—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Just make sure she doesn't get into the library. The shelves are unstable on the north wall." Elise looked at him for a long moment. "Of course," she said quietly. "Good night, Mr. Kane." She left, and Jasper sat alone in the dark again, the bread untouched, the mansion breathing around him like something that had outlived its own purpose. Not with his own hands, he had people for that, but every fixture, every choice, every detail of the Kane estate had passed through his approval. He'd wanted it to feel like power made permanent, like something that couldn't be taken away. He'd been wrong about that. The morning after the accident, when he'd woken up in the hospital and truly understood, that the feeling below his waist wasn't coming back. His first thought hadn't been about walking. It hadn't been about pain. His first thought had been, they'll come for the empire now. And they had. God, how they had. His second in command, a man named Farrell, had started quietly rerouting territories before Jasper had even been discharged. His business partners, men who had shaken his hand and looked him dead in the eye and called him brother, had begun pulling their money within a week. And Monica hadn't even come to the hospital. She'd sent a note, 3 sentences, printed, not handwritten, which had felt like its own kind of cruelty. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Please don't contact me." Jasper had read it 4 times. Then he'd folded it and put it in his breast pocket and hadn't spoken for 6 hours. His lawyer had called it a difficult period of transition. Jasper had called it something considerably less polished. Physical therapy came and went. Therapists who arrived twice a week spoke to him in careful, encouraging tones and left looking like they'd spent an hour trying to reason with a wall. He did the exercises, mechanically, without investment. Like a man maintaining a car he'd already decided to abandon. His doctors said progress was possible. His doctors said hope was a clinical tool. His doctors didn't know what it felt like to sit at the head of a table that no longer had anyone sitting around it. The calls had stopped. Even the threatening ones, at least those had meant he still mattered. Now the phone sat silent. His empire was being carved up like a feast among wolves, and none of them even thought him worth the courtesy of a threat. That was the part that cut deepest, not the pain, not the chair, not even Monica. It was the silence. Jasper had wheeled himself into the library just after noon because it was the one room in the mansion that still felt like his. The books had always been there. They didn't care about power or weakness. They didn't look at him differently. He'd pulled a volume from the shelf, something dense and difficult. The kind of book he used to read on long flights and had managed exactly 2 pages before the door opened. He'd assumed it was Elise. It was not Elise. The girl who stepped into the library was approximately 4 years old, wearing a yellow dress with a small grass stain on the knee, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She had her mother's dark hair, but her eyes were something else entirely wide and amber and startlingly direct. She looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at her. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said. She considered this information. "I know," she said. She did not leave. Jasper blinked. In 43 years of life years that had included boardroom showdowns, back alley negotiations, and at least one knife fight in a parking structure, in Marseille he had never once been casually defied by a preschooler in a grass-stained dress. "Your mother will be looking for you," he said. "Mama's doing the laundry. The machine makes too much noise." She wrinkled her nose. "I don't like loud noises." "I see." He set the book down. "Well, this is a private room. You can't be in here." "Why, because it's private." "What does private mean?" Jasper stared at her. Something was happening in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not irritation, something stranger than that. "It means it belongs to Mafia," he said, "and I haven't invited you in." The girl tilted her head to one side, studying him the way a very small scientist might study a confusing specimen. "But you're sad," she said simply. The words hit him somewhere behind the sternum. "I'm not sad," he said, his voice coming out harder than he intended. She didn't flinch. "Your eyes are sad," she said. "Mama says eyes don't lie." Jasper opened his mouth, closed it again. The little girl walked completely unbidden, completely without hesitation across the library floor, and stopped about 2 feet away from his wheelchair. She looked at it with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of someone who had not yet learned that staring was rude. "Why do you use that chair, she asked. "Because I was hurt." "Does it still hurt?" A pause. "Sometimes," he said. It was the most honest answer he had given anyone in months. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she held out her stuffed rabbit. "George helps," she said, "when things hurt." Jasper looked at the rabbit. It was well-loved, one ear slightly shorter than the other, a button eye that had been replaced at some point with one that didn't quite match. "George," he repeated. He's very good at helping." Jasper looked from the rabbit to the girl. And despite everything, despite the silence and the empire in ashes, in the 63 days of counting, something pulled at the corner of his mouth that might, under generous interpretation, have been called a smile. "I think I'll manage without George," he said quietly. "But thank you." She pulled the rabbit back satisfied. "Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be in the kitchen. Mama says I can have a biscuit after the laundry." She turned and padded toward the door with the supreme confidence of a child who had accomplished her mission. "Hey," Jasper said. She stopped. "What's your name?" She turned and those amber eyes found his. "Rosie," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then she was gone. He didn't read, he didn't move. He just sat in the quiet library with the afternoon light moving slowly across the floor and thought about a question that a 4-year-old had asked him with absolute weaponized sincerity. "Are you sad?" He was. God, he was. In a way he hadn't admitted to himself in months because sadness felt like weakness and weakness felt like defeat. He had survived by never admitting, not to his enemies, not to his allies, not even to Monica, that anything could touch him. He had built walls tall enough to keep the whole world out, and a little girl in a yellow dress with a stuffed rabbit named George had walked right through them in under 3 minutes. That night he called Elise into the study. She came in brisk and professional, hands folded, ready to receive whatever correction or instruction was coming. "Your daughter," Jasper said. Elise stiffened. "I apologize, Mr. Kane. I'll make sure she—" "Rosie," he said, cutting her off. "That's her name." Elise blinked. "Yes." "How old is she?" "4. She'll be 5 in March." He nodded slowly, looked at his hands. "She's not—" He stopped. "She doesn't seem afraid of much." Something flickered in Elise's expression, a careful kind of pride. "No, she never has been. Even as a baby she was—" She stopped herself, like she'd almost forgotten who she was talking to. "I'm sorry, you didn't ask for—" "I'm asking now," Jasper said quietly. Elise looked at him. Really looked at him. "She's always been brave," Elise said slowly. "Her father left when she was 2. She cried for one night, and then the next morning she picked up her rabbit and said, 'Okay, Mama, what's for breakfast?' Like she'd just decided that was enough grieving." She gave a small, soft laugh that she seemed surprised to hear herself make. "I don't know where she gets it from." Jasper was quiet. "You're doing a good job," he said finally. "With her." Elise stared at him. He had never said anything like that to her before. In 3 years of employment, his feedback had ranged from silence to terse corrections. He had never once, not once, offered anything resembling personal acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "That'll be all." She nodded and left, and Jasper sat alone again, but it felt just fractionally like a different kind of alone. The next morning Rosie was back, not in the library this time. She materialized in the hallway outside his room at 7:45 in the morning, sitting cross-legged on the floor outside his door, George in her lap, apparently waiting. When Jasper opened his door, he nearly ran his wheelchair over her foot. "Good morning," she said like this was perfectly normal. "What are you—" He stopped. "How long have you been sitting there?" She shrugged. "Since Mama started the eggs." That's been 40 minutes, Rosie." "I know. I counted." She stood up, brushed off her dress. "Are you going to the kitchen? I can show you where the good biscuits are. Not the plain ones. The ones with the little bit of orange in them. Mama hides them so I don't eat them all, but I know where they are." Jasper blinked. He had not in his 43 years of life ever had someone offer to guide him to contraband biscuits at 7:45 in the morning. "Lead the way," he said. The kitchen was warmer than the rest of the house. Elise looked up from the stove, saw Jasper in the doorway, and went very still. "Mr. Kane, I'm sorry I didn't know you were—" Rosie was conducting a tour, he said, his voice flat but not unkind. Elise looked at her daughter. Rosie was already on her tiptoes, reaching into the back of the upper cabinet. "Rosie," Elise said in a tone that carried the full weight of maternal authority. "He needed them, Mama," Rosie said reasonably. "He looked like a plain biscuit face." Jasper made a sound. It took him a moment to identify it. He was laughing, not a polished chuckle, not the controlled sound he'd used in boardrooms to signal amusement. An actual laugh, rough and rusty from disuse, that startled him as much as it seemed to startle Elise, who stood frozen with a spatula in her hands, staring at him like he'd suddenly started speaking another language. "A plain biscuit face," Jasper repeated. "It means sad," Rosie said helpfully, climbing down with 2 biscuits in her hand. She held one out to him. "Here, this will help." He took it. He couldn't have explained why. It wasn't a rational decision. He just took the biscuit from the small, sure hand of a 4-year-old girl and bit into it, and it was sweet and slightly orange-flavored and completely absurd, and for the first time in 64 days he felt something other than the weight. 3 weeks passed. They developed a rhythm, not anything anyone had planned or discussed, just something that accumulated quietly the way life often does. Rosie would appear at his door, or in his path, or outside his window, with the absolute conviction of someone who had decided he was her project and was not open to negotiation on the matter. She brought him things, a smooth stone she'd found in the garden that she said was definitely magic, a drawing of what she described as "you and me and George," that featured 2 blobs of different sizes in one smaller blob with ears. A book about a rabbit who overcame adversity, which she sat beside his wheelchair and read aloud to him with enormous seriousness, occasionally stopping to check that he was following along. He was always following along. Elise watched it all with the expression of a woman who didn't quite know what to do with a miracle. One evening, she knocked on the library door after Rosie was in bed. "Mr. Kane, I wanted to say—" She paused like she was deciding. "She talks about you. At night when I'm putting her to sleep. She talks about what you said and what made you laugh." She met his eyes. "I haven't seen her attached to someone like this since her grandfather. I just thought you should know. In case, in case you needed to know." Jasper held her gaze for a long moment. "Thank you, Elise," he said quietly. She nodded and left. He sat in the library until almost midnight, thinking. Not about the empire, not about Monica, not about the men who had abandoned him or the future that had collapsed. Thinking about a stone that was definitely magic. About a drawing of two blobs and a rabbit. About what it meant that a small girl with amber eyes had decided without condition or calculation that he was worth her time. The call came on a Thursday. Jasper had just finished his therapy session, genuinely finished it for the first time without cutting it short out of contempt for the whole enterprise. His therapist, a young man named Dr. Reeves, who had somehow survived 4 weeks of Jasper's hostility through a combination of professional calm and apparent stubbornness, had paused at the end of the session. "You pushed today," Dr. Reeves said carefully. "That's different." "Don't make a thing of it," Jasper said. "I'm not making anything of it, I'm just noting it." "Are we done?" "We're done, Trim." He was wheeling back toward the library when his phone vibrated. An unknown number. He almost ignored it. He'd been ignoring most calls for months. Something made him answer. "Kane," said a voice he recognized immediately, low, smooth, faintly amused in the way of someone who considered their own cruelty a form of wit. Derek Holm, once his closest ally. The man who had sat at his right hand for 8 years. The man who had attended his mother's funeral and given the toast at his engagement party, and who 3 weeks after the accident had taken a third of Jasper's Eastern operation and walked away without a single word of explanation. "Derek," Jasper said, his voice perfectly level, "you have exactly 20 seconds to tell me why you called this number." A pause, then Derek laughed, that soft, impressed laugh that had always preceded bad news. "I've still got that voice," Derek said. "Even now, I'll give you that, Jasper." 15 seconds. "I'm calling as a courtesy, that's all." A beat. "I know things have been quiet for you. I know you've been sitting in that big empty house watching everything we built disappear." Another pause. "I want you to know that's going to continue. I want you to know that I'm going to take the rest of it. And I want you to know that there is nothing you can do to stop me." From that chair. The words hung in the air. Jasper's hand had tightened on the phone so hard that his knuckles had gone pale. "From that chair," he repeated quietly. "It was a good run, Jasper. I mean that." "Derek," his voice was soft now, almost gentle. "Thank you for calling." A small silence. Then for just a fraction of a second, something uncertain entered Derek's voice. "What?" "Thank you for calling," Jasper said again. "Now I know exactly where we stand, and everything I do next I'll do knowing you thought this conversation would break me." He let that sit for a beat. It didn't. He ended the call. He sat in the hallway for a long moment. His heart was hammering, not with fear, but with something that was waking up after a very long sleep. Something with teeth. Then he heard footsteps, small, quick, and looked up. Rosie was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, George under her arm, hair everywhere from sleep. She looked at him, then at the phone in his hand. "Who was that?" she asked with the complete absence of boundaries that only small children fully achieve. "Someone who thought they knew me," Jasper said. She considered this. "Did they?" He looked at her. The small, fearless, amber-eyed girl who had walked into his library and his life without an invitation and had somehow refused, absolutely, completely refused to see him as what everyone else saw. "No," Jasper said quietly. "They didn't." Rosie nodded, satisfied by this answer. "Come on," she said, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Mama made the soup with the little stars. It's still warm." He let her lead him to the kitchen, and somewhere behind his ribs, in a place that had been locked shut for 65 days, something cracked open, small and tentative as a first light. Not hope, not yet, but the memory of what it felt like. And that for tonight was enough. The soup with the little stars was warm, and Jasper ate every drop of it. He didn't make a thing of it. Rosie sat across the kitchen table from him, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor, feeding George small, invisible spoonfuls with the seriousness of a trained professional. Elise stood at the sink with her back to them both, and Jasper got the impression she was being very deliberate about that, giving him a privacy she sensed he needed even in a room with other people. He set the spoon down when the bowl was empty. "Good," Rosie asked. "Good," he said. She beamed like he'd handed her a trophy. "I told Mama to put in extra stars, because stars are the best part." "They are," he agreed. Elise turned from the sink. She looked at the empty bowl, then at Jasper, and something moved across her face that she quickly rearranged into professional neutrality. But he'd seen it, relief. The particular bone-deep relief of a person who has been quietly worried for a very long time. "Rosie," Elise said softly, "it's past 9. Say goodnight." Rosie slid off the chair, tucking George firmly under her arm. She walked around the table, stopped at the side of Jasper's wheelchair, and looked up at him with those steady amber eyes. "Good night, Mr. Jasper," she said. He'd told her 3 times that his name was Mr. Kane. She had listened politely each time and continued calling him Mr. Jasper as if the distinction was entirely academic. "Good night, Rosie," he said. She patted his hand. Once, like she was reassuring him about something. Then she followed her mother out of the kitchen, and Jasper sat alone in the warm room with the empty bowl in front of him and Derek Holmes' voice still echoing somewhere in the back of his skull. From that chair, he stared at the table, his jaw tightened. He breathed through it. Then he picked up his phone and made a call he had been putting off for 3 weeks. The man who answered was named Victor Hale, and he had worked for Jasper for 11 years in a capacity that didn't appear in any employment record. He answered on the second ring, which told Jasper he'd been expecting the call. Victor was like that, he anticipated. It was the reason Jasper had kept him close long after everyone else had scattered. "Boss," Victor said, just that, like no time had passed at all. "Tell me where he's operating," Jasper said without preamble. A pause. Victor knew immediately who he meant. Holmes moved the eastern routes through 2 new distributors. He's also picked up 2 of your former territory brokers, Marcus and the guy they call Thin. Another pause. "He's been thorough." "I know." Jasper's voice was flat. "What I need to know is where he feels safe, where he gets comfortable, where his guard drops." Victor was quiet for a moment. "That's a different kind of question than you've asked me in a while." "Yes," Jasper said, "it is. You're moving." "I'm thinking. You haven't thought like this in 2 months." "Victor." "Right, okay." He heard papers shifting. "There's a meeting next Thursday. Holmes been consolidating, pulling all the new players into one room to formalize territory agreements. It's the first time he'll have everyone together." Jasper processed this. "Where the Aldrich building, 7th floor, it's a legitimate front property management company. The whole thing will look like a business lunch." "Who's on the door?" "2 of his, maybe 3. He's not expecting interference. Far as he knows, the only person who'd want to disrupt that meeting is sitting in a wheelchair in an empty mansion eating soup." Victor paused. "No offense." "None taken," Jasper said in a tone that suggested considerable offense had been taken. "I want eyes in that building before Thursday. I want to know every person who walks through that door." "I can do that." Another pause. "Jasper, are you sure you want to go down this road again? After everything?" "He called me tonight," Jasper said quietly. "He called me as a courtesy, Victor. He wanted me to know that he's taking the rest of it and there's nothing I can do. He wanted me to hear it and sit here and accept it." His voice dropped lower. "I'm not accepting it." Silence on the line. Then Victor said, "I'll have eyes on the building by tomorrow morning." "Good." He ended the call. The kitchen was completely quiet now. From somewhere deep in the house, he could faintly hear Elise's voice, gentle and low, reading to Rosie before sleep. He couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it, the way a mother's voice sounds when a child is almost asleep. Jasper sat with that sound for a long moment. Something about it made the cold thing in his chest feel less absolute. He wheeled himself back to the library and opened the book he'd abandoned 2 weeks ago, and this time he read 20 pages. Coincidental. The next morning came the way mornings had started to come since Rosie Faster, with a specific kind of pull towards something other than the dark interior of his own thoughts. He was up before 7, which would have seemed impossible 5 weeks ago, and he'd done his morning exercises, the ones Dr. Reeves had left him with a printed chart and an encouraging smile without anyone asking him to. He was in the hallway when he heard it. Crying. Not Rosie, Elise. He stopped. The sound was coming from behind the door of the small room off the kitchen that served as a staff break area. Quiet, controlled crying, the kind that has had a lot of practice staying quiet. Jasper sat outside that door for a full 30 seconds. He was not a man built for moments like this. He had no architecture for them. The men who had worked for him over the years had learned very quickly that personal difficulties were personal. They stayed behind closed doors and did not enter his. It was a system that had functioned perfectly for decades. He knocked. The crying stopped immediately. A sharp intake of breath. Silence. "One moment," Elise said, her voice deliberately level. He waited. She opened the door. Her eyes were red, but her expression was composed the way you compose yourself when you've spent years being composed around people who can dismiss you. "Mr. Kane, I'm sorry. I'll be ready in a—" "What happened?" he said. She blinked. "Nothing. I apologize. I'll start breakfast right away." "Elise." His voice was quiet, not demanding. "What happened?" She pressed her lips together, looked at a point just past his shoulder. He could see her deciding the same calculation as always, the one where she weighed what was safe against what was true. "My landlord called last night," she said finally. After Rosie went to sleep." She exhaled. "He's selling the building. We have 60 days to vacate." She met his eyes for a moment, then looked away. "It's fine. I'll find something." In 60 days, with a 4-year-old. "People manage." She said it firmly, like she was daring herself to believe it. "We'll manage." Jasper looked at her. "How long have you been in that apartment?" 6 years. "And Rosie was born there?" Something flickered in Elise's face. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "There are 6 unused rooms in the East Wing," he said. 3 of them are larger than your current apartment, if I remember the floor plan correctly." Elise stared at him. "Mr. Kane, I can't—" "It's practical," he said, cutting off whatever protest was forming. "You're here 6 days a week. The commute wastes your time and costs you money. Rosie could have a stable space." He looked at the wall. "The East Wing sits empty. It's pointless." Elise was very still. "I would adjust your compensation accordingly," he added, because he sensed she needed the transaction framed in practicality rather than charity. It would be an employment arrangement. "Jasper." She stopped herself. Her hand went to her mouth. "Mr. Kane, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "It's fine," he said more quickly than he intended. "Think about it. There's no pressure." He wheeled past her to the kitchen to start the kettle because he suddenly needed something to do with his hands. And behind him, he heard Elise let out one small, unsteady breath that she probably hadn't meant for him to hear. She said yes that afternoon, 2 words very formal. "I accept," like she was signing a contract, and then she turned back to whatever she was doing, and that was that, except that Rosie found out approximately 4 minutes later and erupted in the kind of joy that only small children can produce, full body, full volume, completely uncontained. "We get to live here," she shouted from down the hall. "Inside," voice Elise called. "We get to live here," Rosie repeated, in what she apparently believed was an inside voice. She appeared in the library doorway, pink with excitement. "Mr. Jasper, did you know we get to live here?" "I had heard something to that effect," Jasper said. She launched herself at his wheelchair and hugged his arm with both of hers. George wedged between them, and Jasper sat very still with a 4-year-old attached to his arm and did not know what expression his face was making, but suspected it was not one he'd ever made in a business meeting. "Thank you," Rosie said, her voice muffled against his sleeve. He patted her head, once awkward and careful. "You're welcome," he said quietly. "Now let go. I'm trying to read." She let go, took 2 steps toward the door, turned back. "Mr. Jasper? I knew you were nice, even when you were doing the scary face." She left before he could respond to that. He sat for a moment looking at the doorway she'd disappeared through. Then he looked at his book. Then he put the book down and looked at the ceiling. The scary face. He had spent 20 years cultivating that face. Entire rooms of people had recalibrated their behavior because of that face. 3 city officials had changed their votes because of that face. A 4-year-old had seen right through it in approximately 48 hours. He picked the book back up, but he wasn't really reading. Thursday arrived the way Jasper had known it would, with Victor's information in hand and a plan assembled in his mind through 3 nights of deliberate, careful thinking. Not reckless, not emotional. The way he used to plan back when planning had been his greatest weapon. Victor had sent names, 14 people attending Derek's meeting. Jasper knew 9 of them personally. 3 of those 9 had grievances with Derek that predated their current alliance, pragmatic grievances, the kind that money and access could aggravate. 2 of the remaining 5 were third-party brokers whose loyalty was purely financial. Jasper made calls, quiet calls, precise. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand. He simply had conversations in which he reminded certain people that loyalty to Derek Holm was a recent investment and that recent investments carried risk, while established relationships with Jasper Kane had historically been very, very profitable. By Wednesday night, 3 of the 14 had quietly confirmed they would not be attending Thursday's meeting. When Victor called with the update, there was audible admiration in his voice. 3 no-shows. Holm's going to walk into that room and feel it shift before anyone says a word. That's the point, Jasper said. You're not going to move directly against him. Not yet. Not directly. A pause. I want him nervous. I want him looking over his shoulder. I want him to start making decisions from instability instead of confidence. That's how you used to take people apart, Victor said quietly. Yes, Jasper said. It is. After he ended the call, he sat in the dark of the library for a while. Then the door opened. He knew the footsteps by now, the soft, slightly uneven gait of small feet navigating the world. Rosie, he said without turning around, it's 11 o'clock at night. I had a dream that was too loud, she said. She came to stand beside his wheelchair. Can I sit here for a little bit? He looked at her. She had her pajamas on rabbit under one arm, hair sticking up on one side from sleep. She looked very small and very serious. For a little bit, he said. She climbed onto the settee next to his chair, tucked her feet under her, and settled in. After a moment, she said, What are you thinking about? Work. Is it bad work or good work? He considered this. Necessary work. She thought about that. Is it dangerous? He looked at her. No, he said firmly. No, it isn't. She seemed to accept this. She looked at George, straightened his ear, and said, Mr. Jasper, do you have friends? The question landed quietly like a stone dropped into still water. I have people who work for me, he said after a moment. That's not the same as friends, she said with absolute certainty. No, he agreed, it's not. She looked at him. You can have me as a friend if you want. I already decided you're my friend. He looked at this child who had already decided without asking him that they were friends, who had moved herself and her rabbit into his house, in his mornings, in his kitchen, in his library, and felt something in his chest shift with a weight he couldn't name. Then I suppose I have one friend, he said. She nodded, satisfied. One is good, one is enough to start. She fell asleep on the settee. 20 minutes later, George clutched in her arms, and Jasper sat beside her in the quiet dark and thought about Derek Holm and empire and power and what it meant that the only person in his life who had called themselves his friend was 4 years old and currently snoring very faintly into a stuffed rabbit. He thought about his father who had built the original network and had told him once, only once, in a rare moment of what might have been wisdom. The thing about power, Jasper, is that it only feels like power when there's someone worth protecting. His father had meant it as justification, a reason to be ruthless. Look, it's all in service of something. Jasper had always taken it that way. He wasn't sure he did anymore. He was still sitting there when Elise appeared in the doorway an hour later, panicked and searching, and found her daughter asleep on the settee and Jasper in his chair beside her, a book open in his lap that he had not actually been reading. Elise stopped in the doorway. She took in the scene, her daughter asleep, Jasper watching over her without having been asked, and pressed one hand briefly against her mouth. I'll take her back to bed, she whispered. She said a dream was too loud, Jasper said quietly. Elise nodded. She gets that. She always has. She crossed the room, carefully lifted Rosie, who made a small protesting sound in her sleep, and then went boneless with the absolute trust of a child who knows the arms holding her. Elise held her daughter close for a moment, then looked at Jasper. Thank you, she said softly, for letting her stay. She makes good company, Jasper said. He looked at the window. Lisa, I need you to know something. She waited. Things may become complicated in the next few weeks. On my end, business. He paused, choosing the words. I want you and Rosie to remain inside the estate during that time. I'll explain what I can when I can, but I need you to trust me when I tell you it's a precaution, not a cause for alarm. Elise looked at him for a long moment, her daughter warm and sleeping in her arms. Are we safe? She asked. Direct, no flinching. He met her eyes. I will make sure of it, he said. And then quietly, with absolute certainty, nothing will touch her. Elise held his gaze for one more beat, nodded, and carried Rosie back to bed. Jasper sat alone in the library, picked up the phone, sent Victor one message, I need a perimeter on the estate. Starting now, don't make it visible. The reply came back in under a minute. Already done, I've had 2 people on the gate since Monday. Jasper stared at the message. Then he typed back, you anticipated. Victor's reply, always boss. He set the phone down on the armrest of his wheelchair, looked at the settee where Rosie had been sleeping 20 minutes ago, at the small indentation in the cushion where she'd curled up. Such a small, uncomplicated weight. Such an outsized, unmistakable presence. Derek Holm had called him from that chair as though the chair were the whole story. As though the chair erased the mind, the history, the network, the patience. As though everything Jasper Kane was could be contained in what he couldn't do. Derek was wrong, and he was about to spend considerable energy learning exactly how wrong, but that Jasper thought could wait until morning. Right now, he was going to sit here in the quiet library of his quietly healing house, and he was going to finish this chapter, and then he was going to sleep. Not because he was at peace, not yet, but because somewhere in the East Wing, a small girl with amber eyes was sleeping safely, and her mother was sleeping safely, and he had made a promise to someone tonight, not with words, but with the certainty in his voice. And Jasper Kane had always kept his promises. The ones that mattered anyway. This one mattered most. The morning it happened, Rosie had asked for the orange biscuits at breakfast, and Jasper had told Elise where the good ones were hidden on the highest shelf behind the rice flour, and Rosie had looked at him like he'd betrayed a sacred confidence, and then laughed so hard she'd knocked George off the table. That was the morning. That was how it started. By afternoon, she was gone. Jasper found out the way you find out about things that shatter your world. Not slowly, not with preparation, but all at once, a single phone call, a single sentence, and then the ground you thought was solid simply wasn't anymore. Elise's voice came through the phone, high and cracked, stripped of the composure she'd spent years building. She's not here, Jasper, she's not. I went to get her from the garden, and she's not there. Her shoes are there. George is there. She would never leave George. She would never. Stop, he said. His voice was very quiet. Elise, stop. When did you last see her? 20 minutes ago, maybe 25. I was in the kitchen. She was in the garden. I could see her from the window, and then I looked away for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and when I went out, she was... Her voice broke. Jasper, someone took her. Someone took my baby. He had already started moving. Get inside, he said. Lock every door. Don't open anything for anyone. I'm calling Victor right now. Jasper. Elise. He said her name like a hand on her shoulder, firm, grounding. I'm going to find her. Do you hear, Saul? I'm going to bring her home, but I need you inside and I need you safe. Can you do that? A breath, ragged, terrible. Then yes. Good. Go. He hung up and called Victor before the phone had even left his ear. Victor answered on the first ring. I know, he said. I'm already on it. One of the gatemen saw a black SUV, no plates, parked on the service road behind the east wall. It was there for 40 minutes before anyone flagged it. Jasper felt something cold move through his entire body. How long ago? 28 minutes. 28 minutes. A 4-year-old girl. No shoes. No George. It's Derek, Jasper said. He said it without question because he had no questions about it. This was exactly the kind of move Derek Holm made, not direct, never direct, always through someone else's pain. That was how Derek had always operated. He didn't come at you. He came at the thing you couldn't afford to lose. And somehow Derek had seen what Jasper himself had barely admitted to himself. It's Derek, Victor confirmed. He called one of our people 10 minutes ago. Wanted to make sure the message got to you. What message? A pause. Victor's voice dropped. He says he wants the Southern network, all of it. Territory contacts, infrastructure. Everything you've spent the last 3 weeks quietly rebuilding. Another pause. He says if you give it to him in writing by 6 o'clock tonight, he'll return the girl unharmed. The words hit like a physical impact. Jasper's hand tightened on the phone until the case creaked. He has 6 hours, Victor said carefully. Jasper, what do you want to do? What did he want to do? He wanted to destroy Derek Holm with a completeness that the word destroy didn't quite cover. He wanted to take apart everything Derek had built with his bare hands, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the lesson. He wanted to make absolutely certain that every person who had watched Jasper Kane roll into that wheelchair and written him off would understand in the most permanent terms possible exactly how catastrophic that miscalculation had been. But first, he wanted Rosie back. Don't do anything yet, Jasper said. Don't move, don't threaten, don't make contact. I need to think. You have 6 hours. I know how many hours I have, Victor. He hung up. The silence in the hallway was enormous. He sat in it for exactly 45 seconds. He counted them because counting was something he could control right now, and there was very little else that he could, and then he began to think. Not with anger. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford in the next 6 hours. With clarity. The cold architectural clarity that had built his empire in the first place. He pulled apart Derek's move the way you pull apart a mechanism looking for the fault line, the piece that doesn't quite fit the assumption that if wrong unravels everything else. Derek assumed Jasper would negotiate. That was the fault line. Derek knew Jasper had rebuilt connections over the past weeks. He knew some of Thursday's meeting had collapsed because of Jasper's calls. He'd felt a shift in confidence among his new allies, felt them starting to look sideways at their new arrangement. So he'd escalated. He'd reached for Jasper's pressure point. What Derek didn't know, what he couldn't know because he'd written Jasper off 2 months ago and stopped watching him closely, was that Jasper had spent the last 72 hours doing something much more specific than rebuilding territory relationships. He'd been building a case. Victor had helped. Quietly, methodically, with the patience of someone who had learned patience from a man who considered it the most underused weapon in any arsenal. Financial records cross-referenced, shell companies traced, a paper trail connecting Derek Holm to 3 separate incidents that certain federal investigators had been very interested in for a very long time. It wasn't complete, it wasn't ready. It was 75% of what Jasper needed, but 75% in the right hands with the right leverage was often more than enough. He called a number he hadn't used in 4 years. The man who answered had a flat, unhurried voice and the title of Deputy Regional Director, and he owed Jasper a debt that had never been formally acknowledged between them, but that both men understood with perfect clarity. I need to meet, Jasper said. A very brief pause. I'm listening. Not on the phone, in person. 2 hours. Another pause. This is about Holm. It's about everything Holm has been doing for the past 8 years that your office has been trying to document. Jasper kept his voice level. I have documentation, more than you have. I'll give you everything clean and organized, admissible, and complete in exchange for one thing. What thing? A little girl, Jasper said. 4 years old. He took her this morning. I need her back in the next 6 hours. The silence on the other end was different this time. Heavier. Send me a location, the man said. Elise was sitting in the kitchen when Jasper came back inside. She had both hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and her eyes were dry in the way eyes get when they've moved past the stage where crying is possible and into something more raw and more still than grief. She looked up when he came in. Tell me, she said. He told her. All of it. Derek the ultimatum, the 6-hour window. He didn't soften it. He'd learned somewhere in the past weeks that Elise was not a woman who needed things softened. She needed the truth, even when the truth was terrible, because the truth was something she could stand on even when it hurt. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. He took her, she said, to get to you. Yes. Her jaw tightened. Because he saw what she means to you. Jasper said nothing. Does she? Elise asked. She looked at him directly. Does she mean I'm not asking to make you say something? I'm asking because I need to know if the person who is trying to get my daughter back is doing it because It's the right thing, or because she stopped, pressed her lips together. I need to know that Rosie matters to you, not as a piece of this, not as a reason to settle a score, as herself. The question sat between them. Jasper thought about the drawing, the two blobs and the rabbit, the stone that was definitely magic, the way she had walked into his library without permission and looked at his wheelchair without pity and asked him if he was sad, with the direct, devastating honesty of someone who hadn't yet learned to look away from true things. She matters, he said. He said it simply without armor. She matters more than the network, and more than Derek, and more than any of it. If I had to choose between bringing her home and burning everything else to the ground, I would light the match without blinking. Elise looked at him for a long moment. He could see her taking it in, measuring it against whatever she'd feared finding. Then she nodded. Once, and some of the terrible stillness went out of her shoulders. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. Stay here. Stay close to your phone. When I call you, pick up immediately. And the person you're meeting, he can help. He wants Derek more than I do, which makes him useful. Elise wrapped her hands tighter around the cup. Jasper. She said his name, not his title. He noticed. He thought she might not have. She didn't bring her shoes inside because she was going to come back. She left George in the garden because she was just going to run to the fence and back. She always does that. She counts the post. Her voice broke just slightly, then held. She was going to come right back. I know, he said quietly. She's coming back, Elise. Tonight. He said it the way he had said it to men across tables for 2 decades, not as comfort, but as fact. Not as a wish, but as a decision already made. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. Jasper arrived with a flash drive and a memory for detail that had not dulled 1 degree in 2 months of sitting still, and laid out for a man with a federal badge and very attentive eyes the full architecture of Derek Holmes' operation, the routes, the shells, the accounts, the bums. He gave it cleanly, the way you hand someone a weapon you have already loaded. The man across from him looked at the documentation for a long time. This is considerable, he said. I know what it is. You understand that if I move on this, it becomes a federal matter. You have no control over outcome. I don't want control over outcome, Jasper said. I want the girl. Everything else you can have. The man studied him. You're serious. I've never been anything else. A pause. Where is he holding her? I don't know the specific location yet. My man is working on it. When I have it, I'll send it to you directly. I need your people positioned and ready to move within the hour. The man closed the folder, looked at Jasper. You know this ends your ability to operate in this space. The moment I open this file, there's scrutiny on everyone connected to it, including you. I know. And you're willing to... I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Jasper said, to bring a 4-year-old girl home to her mother tonight. He held the man's gaze. Is that a concept you're having trouble understanding, or can we move forward? The man almost smiled. Forward, he said. Victor found the location at 4:17 in the afternoon. It was a warehouse space on the industrial east side when Derek had used as a fallback position 2 years ago before Jasper had restructured that part of the operation. Derek thought Jasper didn't know about it. He'd been wrong about that, the way he'd been wrong about several things. Victor's text came through, confirmed. 2 men inside with her. Derek's not there, he's at the Aldrich building, waiting for your answer. Jasper read it twice, sent it immediately to the federal number. Then he called Derek. Derek answered on the 3rd ring, and when he did, Jasper could hear the satisfaction in his voice, the premature, unearned satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. Jasper, Derek said warmly, I was wondering when you'd call. I'm calling now. And Jasper said nothing for exactly 5 seconds. He'd learned this: the weight of a silence precisely calibrated could communicate more than a sentence. He let those 5 seconds sit between them. I'm not giving you the network, Jasper said. A pause from Derek, very brief. Jasper, I don't think you understand that. I understand completely. You have 2 men watching a child in a warehouse on the east side, and you're sitting in your office at the Aldrich building waiting for me to capitulate. He kept his voice conversational. What you don't understand is that federal agents have been en route to that warehouse for the last 12 minutes, and that the documentation I handed over today, Everything, Derek, the full picture means that in approximately 2 hours, your name is going to appear in paperwork that will follow you for the rest of your life. The silence this time was longer. You're bluffing, Derek said, but his voice had changed. Something had tightened in it, gone thin at the edges. I have never bluffed, Jasper said quietly. In 20 years, you know that. Another silence. He could hear Derek breathing, thinking, recalculating. You traded your empire, Derek said slowly, and there was something almost like disbelief in it. You gave them everything. For a kid. For some housekeeper's kid who you've known for 2 months? Yes, Jasper said. That's insane, though. Maybe, a pause. Or maybe you simply never understood what I was willing to fight for. And I never understood it either until recently. He let that land. The girl is going to be brought home in the next hour. If your men touch her, if she has so much as a scratch, what I handed over today will look generous compared to what I do next. We understand each other. Silence. Derek, his voice dropped to its lowest register, the one that had once stopped rooms. Do we understand each other? We understand each other, Derek said, very quietly. Jasper ended the call. His heart was hammering. His hands, when he looked at them, were completely steady. Victor called at 5:41. She's out, he said, and in his voice, Victor Hale, 11 years of unflappable professionalism. There was an unmistakable crack of relief. Federal team went in clean, no resistance. Both men surrendered immediately. She's okay, Jasper, she's okay. She's asking for George. Jasper closed his eyes. Just for a moment. She's asking for George, he repeated. That is the first thing she said, apparently. Where's George? The agent who pulled her out didn't know what that meant, so he radioed it in like it was a code word, and now there are 6 federal agents trying to figure out what George is. It was so exactly perfectly rosy that Jasper felt something crack open in his chest that he didn't have a name for. I'll send someone with the rabbit, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. He noted this and decided it was acceptable. There's one more thing, Victor said. His tone shifted. Jasper went still. What? Derek's gone. He walked out of the Aldrich building 4 minutes after your call. His car is still in the parking structure. His phone is off. A beat of silence. He ran, Jasper said. He ran. Jasper processed this. Derek home, 20 years of operations. Everything he had taken, everything he'd built on the ruins of Jasper's trust had panicked and run the moment the ground shifted. He hadn't stayed to fight. He hadn't played his last card. He'd simply disappeared like smoke. Let him run, Jasper said after a moment. Jasper, the federal case will find him eventually. That's their job now. Mine is done. He paused. My job right now is that a little girl needs her rabbit. He hung up, called Elise. She picked up before the first ring had finished. Is she? She's safe, Jasper said. She's out. She's asking for George. The sound Elise made was not a word. It was something that came from a place below words. A mother's sound, raw and total and human in a way that had nothing to do with language. She's asking for George, Elise said finally when she could speak again. I know. She's okay. She's okay. He paused. Victor said the agents are confused about the code word George. I told them to send me the location so you and I can bring him. Elise let out a sound that was somehow a laugh and a sob in the same breath. She definitely traumatized several federal agents today. That's my assessment as well, Jasper said. A pause. Jasper. Elise's voice was different now, stripped of everything except what was true. You gave up everything, didn't you? Victor told me what you were doing, the network, the contacts, all of it. He said nothing. Why? She asked, softly. He thought about the library, about the biscuits with the orange, about a drawing of 2 blobs and a rabbit, about the way it had felt to sit in the dark beside a sleeping 4-year-old and feel for the first time in as long as he could remember that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Because some things, he said quietly, are worth more than empire. Elise was silent on the other end of the line. Then she's going to ask to sleep in the library again when you bring her home. I know. Are you going to say yes? He was already moving toward the east wing, toward the small room where George sat waiting on an unmade bed with one mismatched button eye. Yes, Jasper Kane said. And for the first time in a very long time, the word came without calculation, without strategy, without armor. Just yes. Just that. They brought Rosie home at 6:30. She walked through the front door of the estate under her own power, which was the first thing Jasper registered. She wasn't being carried. She wasn't trembling. She was walking small and upright and deliberate with a federal agent's jacket draped over her shoulders because it was cold and someone had thought to give it to her, and it was so large on her that it reached her knees. She walked through the door and immediately looked around the hallway with the focused expression of someone conducting an important search. "George," she said. Elise was already on her knees in front of her daughter, hands on Rosie's face, checking her the way mothers check, systematically, urgently, trying to find evidence of harm and finding none and not quite being able to believe it. "Baby, baby, look at me. Are you hurt? Did anyone?" "Mama." Rosie's voice was patient, the patience of a child who understands she is being worried over but has a more pressing priority. "Where is George?" Jasper held out the rabbit. Rosie's eyes went to it immediately. She took George from his hand, tucked him under her chin, closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds Jasper saw it, the thing she'd been holding back, the tremor that moved through her small body like a wave passing through water. Then it was gone. Her eyes opened. She looked up at Jasper with those amber eyes and said very seriously, "Thank you for bringing him." "Of course," Jasper said. "The men in the building didn't have rabbits," she said. "It was very boring." He stared at her. Were you frightened?" She considered this with the gravity of a philosopher considering an important question. "A little bit," she admitted. "At first, but then I thought about what you said." "What did I say?" "You said nothing would touch me." She looked at him steadily. "So I waited." Jasper Kane, who had not cried when the bullet found his spine, who had not cried when Monica's note arrived in 3 printed sentences, who had not cried through 63 days of silence and collapse in the slow death of everything he'd built, Jasper Kane felt his eyes burn. He looked at the wall, breathed through it. "Good," he said when he could trust his voice. "Good girl." Elise pulled Rosie into her arms then and held her with the full, fierce, wordless love of a mother who has spent 6 hours not knowing, and Rosie let herself be held, and George was pressed between them, and Jasper looked away and gave them the privacy of it. Victor appeared at his elbow. "Derek's been located," he said quietly. "Tried to cross into a neighboring state. Federal Highway Patrol picked him up 40 minutes ago." "Good," Jasper said. "It's over." Jasper watched Elise holding her daughter. "Yes," he said. It is." The days that followed were quieter than Jasper expected. He'd anticipated a reckoning from himself, from the world, from the legal machinery now grinding through Derek Holmes' affairs and the collateral examination of everything connected to it. He'd made his peace with scrutiny. He'd known when he handed over that flash drive that the light would fall on him too. Some things would be examined. Some associations would be uncomfortable. He had his lawyers and he had the truth, which in his case was this: he had chosen definitively and without hesitation to step back from the machinery he'd once run, and he had documented that choice in the most irrevocable way possible. His lawyers called it strategic cooperation. Jasper called it what it was: he'd burned it down. The empire, the network, the careful architecture of fear and influence that had taken 2 decades to build, gone, in exchange for a 4-year-old girl and a rabbit named George. His lawyer, a precise man named Aldous, who had worked for him for 15 years and had the unreadable face of someone who had witnessed considerable history, sat across from him 3 days after Rosie came home and said very carefully, "You understand the scope of what you've surrendered." "I do. There is no recovering it, not in any traditional sense. The federal involvement alone, I know Aldous." A pause. "You seem, He stopped, chose another word. "Settled." "I am," Jasper said. Aldous looked at him for a long moment. "There are still assets, the estate's several legitimate holdings enough to live well. More than well." "I know. And you're," another careful pause, "this is genuinely where you want to be." Jasper looked at the doorway of the library where earlier that morning, Rosie had installed herself with a stack of books she couldn't read yet, but was working through with intense fictional narration George propped against a cushion as her audience. He had sat beside her for half an hour and read his own book, while she quietly told George the story of a horse who flew to the moon. When he'd asked how the horse breathed in space, she'd looked at him like he was very slow and said, "Magic, Mr. Jasper, obviously." "Yes," he told Aldous. "This is where I want to be." Aldous closed his folder, looked at his client, a man he had first met 20 years ago, in a room full of dangerous people, a man who had moved through the world like a force of nature, and who was now sitting calmly in a wheelchair in a quiet library, discussing the surrender of a criminal empire with the composure of someone discussing a weather forecast. "I believe you," he said finally, with something that might have been respect. It was 2 weeks after Rosie came home that Elise knocked on the library door after 9 o'clock. Rosie was asleep. The house was quiet. Jasper looked up from his book. "Can I come in?" she asked. "You're already in," he said. Which was true, she was standing inside the doorway, but she'd asked anyway, which was the kind of person she was. She sat in the chair across from him. Not the formal upright sit of an employee. She just sat the way a person sits when they're tired and comfortable and past the point of performance. "I've been thinking," she said, about what happens now." She looked at her hands. "The situation has changed. She paused. "You gave up an enormous amount. Things are different than they were when I first started working here. And I want to know where we stand, where Rosie and I stand." "Nothing has changed," Jasper said. Jasper. She used his name without the title now, had been doing it since the night of the phone call, since he'd said nothing will touch her, and meant it so completely that something formal between them had simply dissolved. "Everything has changed. Your circumstances are..." "My circumstances are that I have more than enough to maintain this house and everyone in it for a very long time," he said. "And I'm discovering a preference for company." He said it like it was mildly surprising information. "Something I didn't know about myself until recently." Elise looked at him. "She loves you," she said quietly. "You know that." "I know." She stopped. "A child's love is not a small thing. I need you to know that. She doesn't give it the way adults give things, with conditions and caution. Her voice was careful. "She decided you were hers, and she doesn't let go of things she decides are hers." "I know that too," Jasper said. "The evidence is fairly extensive." A small silence. "And you?" Elise asked. Not pushing, just asking, direct in the way she was always direct when it mattered. He set his book down, looked at her. This woman who had brought her daughter to work every day and never hidden her child behind professionalism, who had fed him soup with little stars when he hadn't eaten in 2 days, who had stood in his kitchen and not flinched once, who had handed him the truth when she asked about Rosie and accepted his answer without hedging. "She's mine too," he said. Simple, certain. "Whatever that means, whatever form it takes, she's mine, if you'll allow it." Elise was quiet for a long moment. He could see something moving through her, and not surprise exactly. More like the settling of something that had been suspended in uncertainty finally finding its place. "She'll try to redecorate your library," Elise said. "She already has. There's a drawing on the wall next to the north shelf." "I know. I told her to ask permission first." "She asked. I said yes." Elise looked at him. "You said yes." "It's a drawing of the three of us," Jasper said. "I wasn't going to say no to that." The three of us. He'd said it without planning to. It sat in the air between them, and he didn't take it back. Elise looked at her hands again. When she looked back up, something in her face was different, open in a way she didn't usually allow outside of her daughter. "The three of us," she repeated softly. If that's something you want," he said. He was not a man built for this kind of sentence, for this specific exposure, and he was aware of it, the awkwardness of it, the absence of his usual armor. He was saying something true without knowing exactly what it would mean. "I'm not..." He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not the man I was. I know that. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything. Except to be allowed to be here. For her. He stopped again. "For us," Elise said quietly. He met her eyes. "For us," he said. The silence was warm. That was the only word for it. Not empty, not tense. Warm like the kitchen on a cold morning, with the soup on the stove and Rosie swinging her legs because they didn't reach the floor. Okay, Elise said softly. Just that. Okay. Wham. The twist no one saw coming arrived not with a phone call or a confrontation. It arrived in the form of a letter delivered by a private courier on a Monday morning addressed in handwriting Jasper recognized immediately because he had once known it better than his own. Monica. He looked at the envelope for a long time before he opened it. Elise saw it on the hall table and said nothing because she was not a woman who demanded explanations for things that weren't hers to demand. He took it to the library and opened it alone. It was 3 pages handwritten this time, not printed. The contrast was not lost on him. She wrote that she'd heard what had happened Derek, the federal case, all of it. She wrote that she'd been wrong, that she'd panicked, that she'd been afraid, that she had looked at the wheelchair and seen only what was ending instead of what was still there. She wrote that she missed him, that she had thought about calling for months and hadn't been able to find the words. She wrote in the last paragraph, I know I have no right to ask anything, but if there's any part of you that's still, if you're still, she hadn't finished the sentence. Jasper sat with the letter for a long time. He thought about the first day Monica had walked into his life, how certain he'd been, how complete it had felt, that specific certainty of a man who believes he has found the fixed point around which everything else can rotate. He thought about the 3-sentence note that had arrived while he was still in the hospital. He thought about 63 days of counting. Then he thought about a stone that was definitely magic, about a drawing on the wall next to the north shelf, about a woman who had fed him soup and held her ground in the face of everything he was and had asked him plainly, does she matter to you, because she needed to know the truth before she trusted him with the things she loved most. He picked up a pen, wrote 2 lines on a clean sheet of paper. I wish you well, Monica. I mean that sincerely. But the life you left is gone and the one that replaced it isn't mine to give away. He sealed it, handed it to the courier. Then he wheeled himself to Dr. Reeves' next session and for the first time told the man what he actually wanted from physical therapy. Not recovery as abstract concept, not maintenance as obligation. Something specific, a goal with a shape to it. I want to stand, Jasper said, even once, even for 30 seconds. I want to stand up at a level that a 4-year-old can hug me properly instead of having to reach up. Dr. Reeves looked at him for a moment. Then he said, that's the most specific goal you've given me in 4 months. I know. It's a good one. I know that too. Can we start? 6 weeks later, Rosie's 5th birthday arrived in the way Rosie arrived at everything, with considerable volume and absolute certainty about what was required. What was required, she had explained in a very thorough briefing to both Jasper and Elise, was cake with the orange flavor balloons that were specifically yellow and a story. Not a book, not a recording. A story told out loud by Mr. Jasper in the library with George's audience. Jasper had agreed to all 3 conditions without negotiation. The cake was orange, the balloons were yellow, and after dinner, after the candles and the singing and the moment where Rosie blew out 5 candles with such force that frosting went sideways onto Jasper's sleeve, and she laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. After all of that, they moved to the library. Rosie settled on the settee with George. Elise sat beside her. Jasper positioned himself in front of them and looked at this small person who had walked through his door 4 months ago in a yellow dress with a grass-stained knee and had proceeded without asking permission to dismantle every wall he had spent decades building. What kind of story, he asked. A true one, she said. True ones. Mama says true stories are the best ones, because nobody made them up. She looked at him with those direct amber eyes. Tell me a true story about you. He was quiet for a moment. Once, he said slowly, there was a man who thought the most important thing in the world was power, and he had a great deal of it. But one day the power went away, and he found out that without it, he didn't know who he was. He was very sad and very alone, and he thought it was going to stay that way forever. Rosie was listening with total, unblinking attention. And then, she asked. And then a little girl walked into his library, Jasper said, without being invited. And she asked him if he was sad. And he was. He was the saddest he had ever been in his life. But no one had ever asked before, so he didn't know how to answer. What did he do? Rosie asked very softly. He let her stay, Jasper said, and that was the beginning of the whole thing. Rosie looked at him for a long moment. I know who the man is, she said. I suspected you did. It's you. Yes. She nodded very seriously, like this confirmed something important she'd already known. Then she slid off the settee, crossed the 3 feet between them, and wrapped her arms around him, the full, unguarded hug of a child who has decided that this is her person, that he belongs to her and she belongs to him, and that nothing about the world as she understands it suggests this should be any other way. He held her. For the first time in 4 months, in the way she'd always wanted and the way he'd been working toward, he held her from a height that met her properly, because earlier that week in Dr. Reeves's office, with Elise watching from the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth, Jasper Kane had stood for 41 seconds. 41 seconds of standing, shaking, burning tears on his face that he didn't try to stop. And the sound of Rosie's voice from the doorway she'd somehow known, somehow appeared the way she always appeared, saying very quietly, I knew you could. I knew it the whole time. He held her now, properly. His arms around her small, certain body, George squashed between them. Mr. Jasper, she said into his shoulder. You're not a plain biscuit face anymore. He laughed, a real one. The full, unguarded kind that was still new enough that it startled him slightly every time. No, he agreed, I'm not. Elise was watching from the chair. He looked at her over Rosie's head, and what passed between them in that look was not complicated. It was simple in the way the truest things always are. Two people who had arrived at the same place by very different roads, who had chosen in the specific way that adults choose things when they know the cost to stay. Rosie pulled back, examined his face with her scientist's thoroughness, and then delivered her verdict with complete finality. Good, she said. George and I decided you should be happy, and what George and I decide is always right. She went back to the settee, tucked herself in beside her mother, and looked at him expectantly. Keep going. What happened next in the true story? Jasper looked at this room, his library, his house, at the woman on the settee, and the child and the battered rabbit and the drawing on the wall beside the north shelf. 3 figures rendered in crayon, 2 large and 1 small. All of them together, the lines imprecise and the proportions entirely wrong, and more true than anything he had ever paid anyone to say about him. What happened next, Jasper said, was the best part. He settled back and told them. All of it, the soup with the little stars, the stone that was definitely magic, the biscuits with orange, the phone call and the flash drive, and the 41 seconds of standing. He told it simply the way true stories want to be told, without decoration, without armor, in the language of a man who had finally, at 43 years old in a wheelchair in a library, with a little girl who had walked through his walls like they were nothing, discovered what he was actually made of. It was not power. It was not fear. It was this, a capacity for love so long buried under empire and ambition that he had genuinely not known it was there, but it had been there all along, waiting the way good things wait with patience that outlasts everything else. Jasper Kane had once ruled the world through fear, but fear in the end had never been the thing that saved him. It had been one small, fearless girl who had looked at a broken man in a wheelchair and seen, without hesitation, without condition, without a single wall between them, exactly who he was, and decided he was worth staying for. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was enough.